In 2025, I talked my wife into visiting the Westport Folk and Bluegrass Festival in Ireland. As most of our long vacations go, it slowly morphed to include stops in Iceland and Scotland. I mean, why not? We arrived in Keflavik mid-morning on an early Icelandic summer day, rented a car, and drove to Reykjavik. Those of you who know me know I don't like spending a lot of money on a fancy downtown hotel when I don't plan to spend much time there. So we ended up at a small budget hotel, the Rec Inn, about a mile east of downtown. After settling in, we walked to, and I don't trust my ability to pronounce it, so you'll just have to read it at the bottom of the screen, the Hallgrímskirkja, the National Church of Iceland, that dominates the Reykjavik skyline. It rises like a huge basalt eruption, stark, rocky, and at one with its surroundings. Nearby stands a statue of Leif Erikson. The U.S. Congress gave the statue to Iceland in 1930, commemorating the 1000th anniversary of Iceland's parliament. Soon the weather grew colder and the wind picked up, so we took refuge in Iceland's nod to the American cult classic, The Big Lebowski. That's right, we went to the Lebowski bar. We didn't spend a lot of time there. I had a beer and Nicole enjoyed some sort of tropical cocktail. Before leaving, I wandered downstairs to visit the men's room and came across a bit of Icelandic humor. Next, we wandered to the stunning Harpa Concert Hall and Conference Center, where we were to meet our guide for an evening food tour. We've made it a habit on the first day of an overseas vacation to fill the day with activities, including a food tour in the evening. Soon enough, we were off sampling Icelandic cuisine.
You can get either a flatland with a warm sauce, broccoli and mashed potatoes, or horse meat with same wine sauce, mashed potatoes, broccoli. I know sweet sticks out it's scary and a bit weird, but this delicacy in Iceland is one of the best meat you can get here.
The famous Reykjavik hot dogs at Bjargen, I can't pronounce it. And we also tried the infamous fermented Greenland shark. By then, we were ready to head back to our hotel room. On the way, we walked past what at first appeared to be a bookstore. At night, however, the place transformed into a bar, and that night there was a pretty good cover band. So naturally, we spent a couple of hours there watching the band. And we weren't alone, for soon the place was packed with a combination of locals and tourists alike, all enjoying the band with us. The next day we rested. Luckily the hotel sat right next to a grocery store named Bonus. We dropped in to see how a local grocery store was stocked. I was surprised to find quite a few very familiar brands. Familiar and not quite the same. And lots of frozen lamb and seafood. We walked around town and found lunch for pizza. I wasn't expecting much, but it turned out to be a good pie. And then after lunch we wandered along the waterfront. Throughout our stay in Reykjavik, I noticed a large number and variety of very well executed murals throughout the city. On day 3, we went to the Blue Lagoon. I didn't bring my phone inside the spa. With my luck, I'd drop it into the pool, which would be a disaster. So instead of trying to document our experience inside of the lagoon or spa, we focused on relaxing and enjoying ourselves. On day 4, we headed inland. We found the interior to be beautiful and considerably greener than the coastal areas around the airport and the Blue Lagoon. Iceland is known as rich in geothermal features, and these draw considerable crowds, eager to watch the earth belch. I've watched with fascination as a steady flow of visitors, including Nicole, voiced an almost childlike glee at the spectacle. Then we drove to Belfast Falls. Though the falls drop is only about 100 feet, the face of the falls extends nearly 600 feet across, throwing up a heavy mist that, combined with the rain that had started again after we left the geothermal field, had soaked us. Still, we were happy to have seen the falls. The next day we were off to Scotland. I should pause here to note that my wife works for an HVAC service company, so she has developed an involuntary habit of noticing HVAC equipment wherever she goes. As something of a long-standing inside joke, I often take pictures of the equipment and include them in my videos. Take this small head unit at the airport, for example. Once in Scotland, we rented a car in Glasgow and drove to the ferry that took us from Wemyss to the Isle of Bute, a small island in the Firth of Clyde, just southwest of Glasgow. The main town on the Isle of Bute is Rothesay, with a population of about 4,200. It is there that my friend Ed lives in retirement after having fallen in love with a Scottish lass. I had planned to see him, but I hadn't been able to get a hold of him once we had left the US, so I was a little bit concerned. After dropping our bags off at our hotel, we went back out in the weather and searched for dinner. We weren't in the mood to search far and wide, but we were able to find a place, the Sulky Room, that served quite a fine charcuterie board with a good selection of wine. By the time we had finished there, the rain had stopped and the evening had turned beautiful. On day 7, I discovered that Ed and I had somehow gotten our wires crossed about when I was arriving. And to further complicate things, I still couldn't reach him. So Nicole and I set off on our own. We visited the Rothesay Castle, a 13th century circular castle complete with a moat. Restoration work was underway at the castle, aimed at preserving the masonry, so there was quite a bit of scaffolding around. I always find these old structures fascinating. There's a tendency to romanticize them, Knights of the Round Table, that sort of thing. I wonder, though, how different the reality was of living in such a place without modern conveniences, particularly on a cold, wet Scottish night. I suspect the romance fades a little. I also paid attention to some of the less glamorous features. What I'm fairly confident is a toilet hole in the wall and a dungeon or pit prison. After the castle, we retreated to Bute Yard, home of the Bute Brew Company and Island of Bute Gin. On the way back to the hotel, I recorded a few random sites, including this clinic that specializes in both podiatry and earwax removal. A strange combination addressing, I suppose, the body's needs at both ends. The next day, Nicole and I visited Mount Stewart, the ancestral seat of the Marquess of Bute. This was my second visit, and I still pause to consider its social and financial history. Built by the third Marquess of Bute, one of the wealthiest men of the Victorian era, his fortune derived from the development and leasing of Cardiff's coal export infrastructure in Wales. While the grounds are beautiful, and it does have one hell of a front yard, it is the interior where the true splendor of the place lies. And yet, it was someone's private residence, with its own chapel of Sicilian marble in a nod to the Sistine Chapel. Later that evening, we finally connected with Ed and his wife, Allison. We did some catching up over dinner, but I must have been pretty beat, as I failed to take any photos. On day 8, we traveled back to Glasgow, had dinner, and rested before proceeding on our journey. I wish I'd had more time in Glasgow, as we always seem to enjoy ourselves there. The following morning, we took a bus from Glasgow down to the ferry at Loch Ryan and then crossed the Irish Sea to Belfast. It was a beautiful crossing and the weather was mild. There were a good number of passengers aboard, but it didn't feel particularly crowded, except for in the lounge. It didn't strike me quite as a party boat, but I can imagine with the right crowd, things could get rowdy. From the ferry terminal, we took a bus to Belfast Central Station, and from there walked about a half a mile to our hotel. After a very brief stop, we wandered downtown to Biddle's Bar. Though it was only mid-afternoon, business was already picking up. But Nicole is not a great fan of beer in a crowded venue, so we moved on after a round, or maybe two, found dinner, and made our way back towards our hotel. About 40 yards from the entrance to our hotel, we spotted a pub named Fibber McGee's, so we thought we'd catch a nightcap there. In the process, we happened to run into Sharon, who, unbeknownst to us, was a friend of our friend Elaine from her time in San Diego. On our first full day in Belfast, we had two objectives. The first was to visit the Titanic Museum, which was high on Nicole's list. I'll admit I wasn't entirely sure what to expect. I mean, the Titanic is sitting at the bottom of the North Atlantic, so what is there to see here? It turns out quite a bit. The exhibits focused on the shipyard where the Titanic was built, the workers, and the construction of the Titanic. After a brief stop at the SS Nomadic, a tender ship moored nearby that served the Titanic and other White Star Line ships, we walked about 2 miles to the C.S. Lewis Square, also high on Nicole's list. I admit, I am not a C.S. Lewis fan and was not sure what to expect. The square and the path that lies behind it display a series of sculptures drawn from the world of Narnia. To be honest, I found it a little strange. I think Nicole found it a little strange too, until she got into the spirit of it. Before dinner, we stopped into a beautiful pub and found ourselves sharing the place with a hen party, possibly two. It was an impressive sight when the ladies filled out of their snugs in numbers I didn't think the space could hold. And yes, those are not rabbit ears. Most, but not all, of the locals seemed unfazed by the procession. That evening we dined at a restaurant called Coco. Though some might find the artwork a bit jarring, the food and the service was good. The next morning, we took a black taxi tour of the areas most associated with the Troubles. Spanning from roughly 1968 to 1998, the Troubles were the most recent and violent chapter in a 4-century-old struggle over Ireland's political and religious destiny. This conflict remains at the heart of the divide between the Unionists, who see Northern Ireland as fundamentally British, and the Nationalists, who view it as inherently Irish. Identity is critical in Northern Ireland. Our first stop was a Unionist neighborhood where there was no subtlety in the identity of the inhabitants. Then we drove to the Republican neighborhood nearby and saw the murals commemorating Bobby Sands, the IRA hunger striker who died in prison in 1981. Then we visited a section of the Peace Wall, one of dozens built to separate the two neighborhoods. I saw how the wall had been expanded upwards at least twice since its initial construction, and it currently stands over 40 feet tall. On one side next to the road, the wall is covered in graffiti. On the other, you can see the secondary fences erected behind Catholic homes to catch whatever gets thrown over the peace wall, rocks, bottles, and worse, to minimize the damage to their homes. Our guide was a fellow about my age who did an outstanding job providing a ground-level accounting of how the neighborhoods and Northern Ireland society in general functioned, having grown up locally during the Troubles. After the Black Taxi tour, we stopped at St. George's Market, had a snack and a small libation. Just for the hell of it. Then we spent a little more time wandering through additional pubs in Belfast. The following morning, we grabbed a train from Belfast Central Station to Dublin. I love traveling by train. It offers a unique vantage point on the city, and as the urban sprawl gives way to the countryside, the journey becomes tranquil and scenic. Dublin wasn't far. Once there, we walked just over half a mile from the Connolly train station to our hotel on Bachelor's Walk. After dropping off our bags, we headed out to Temple Bar, south of the River Liffey, for a brief libation and then a visit to the Irish Rock and Roll Museum. Though I am more of a fan of the Pogues than of U2, I was impressed by the museum's breadth of holdings. It seems every artist who ever set foot in Dublin, including the likes of Prince, Michael Jackson, Eminem, and Rihanna, is represented there through an eclectic collection of memorabilia, personal effects, or studio artifacts. After the museum, we stopped into the Whiskey Reserve, a large facility with an outstanding variety of whiskey and scotch, with a small bar and a room in the back. I had a green spot, my preferred Irish whiskey when I can find it, while they crafted an Irish coffee for Nicole. The next day, we joined a Viking splash tour through Dublin. The range of enthusiasm among those boarding the tour was, let's say, varied. Some looked to be questioning their life choices, while others, like Nicole and I, were bubbling with excitement. One thing that struck me on this tour, in contrast to Belfast, is how the two cities wear their history very differently. In Belfast, the scars of the conflict between the Unionist and Nationalist, the Loyalist and the Republicans, are still fresh and immediate.
Now over here we have the Four Courts. This is where the first shots of the Irish Civil War rang out in 1922.
In Dublin, the focus has shifted. The emphasis was on the Irish Revolution and the longer arc of the resistance to British rule. The Dublin framing is historical rather than recently lived. Our guide was a proud Irish nationalist, a citizen of the Republic, and made no secret of his views on the British or an Irishman he felt had turned their backs on Ireland.
So he was just a traitor.
Yet he delivered his barbs with humor. Still, there was a real substance underneath his jokes. No trip to Dublin is complete without a pilgrimage to the Guinness Storehouse at St. James Gate. The facility is huge, well organized, and maybe even a bit overwhelming, with a lot of options for those who are interested in the brewing of Guinness. And then there are the Guinness experiences. The one we chose was how to pour the perfect pint. My wife, as it turns out, had a little previous experience in this area, and she was happy to display her skills. My expertise, on the other hand, lies in the drinking of the end product. The tour culminated at the top of the building in the Gravity Bar, a couple of large rooms 150 feet above street level with sweeping views across Dublin. The next day, Trinity College. Many people know of Trinity College as the home of the Book of Kells. I've seen the Book of Kells. It's interesting to behold, and its story is fascinating. But I didn't feel a particular urgency that day to see it again. Just beyond the Book of Kells, though, is the Long Room, a breathtaking 200-foot-long gallery housing over 200,000 of Trinity College Library's oldest and most valuable books. The first time I saw it, I was transfixed. This visit, though, was a little disappointing as they were renovating the hall and many of the books had been removed. The hall felt hollowed out. After Trinity College and a savory lunch nearby, we continued on to the Jameson Distillery at Bow Street, a very different experience from the Guinness facility. This was a much more intimate experience with smaller crowds and a focus on tasting the product. I was a little disappointed to learn that all of their whiskey is now distilled in cork, though. After our tour, and maybe an additional sample or two in their front-end bar, we wandered back to our hotel, sampling a little live music on the way. Before moving on, we had to deal with one not-so-little issue, the souvenirs that Nicole had accumulated. So, after what seemed an Elvis-inspired breakfast, we stopped at the post office, where the gentlemen there were very helpful, finding and packing a large box bound for home. Then we made our way to Euston Station and took the train to Westport. Westport seems like it would normally be a quiet little town, except for two things that complicate that first impression. First, it's one of the premier destinations for hen parties in Ireland. And second, once a year, it hosts the Westport Folk and Bluegrass Festival, which of course is why we were there. The next day, after an Irish-Mexican breakfast, we continued wandering the town, sampling the pubs and the food, including Italian food, and then finally we returned to McKing's pub. There the crowd built slowly throughout the afternoon, and the bartenders were struggling to keep up. Band after band. Indeed, I received alarm this morning from my watch. Who knew the traditional Irish music is this loud? On our third day in Westport, Nicole wasn't feeling entirely well, so we took it a little easier. We made our way back to McGing's for a patio open jam session. Musicians filter in and out of the patio all day, play, listen, drink, and probably gossip a bit. The patio fills up quickly with people who come just to listen and drink. Wander into the right pub at the right time, and you'll find musicians playing and jam for the joy. It exactly fits what I think the Folk and Bluegrass Festival should be: casual and more intimate. There was one tune in particular that they played that sticks with me. You Are My Sunshine. It is one of the few songs that I remember my mother singing to me when I was a young child and teaching me to sing. I don't know all the words. I don't know if she knew all the words either. But that connection was still there for me from a time when the relationship between my mother and I was more innocent and less fraught. Certainly less fraught than it became when I and she grew up.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy without a rain. You never know, dear, how much I love you. You don't take my sunshine away.
The next day it was time to leave Westport. The train station stood at the far end of town, so we had a good, proper long walk to close it out. It had been a good vacation, albeit a long one. The following day, we flew from Dublin with a very short layover in Keflavik back to Seattle, where we found a hot day. I didn't know they made those in Seattle.